Welcome to the Alzheimer's Association ALZ Talk on Unconditional Care. Today we're going to be talking about the impact of caregiving on individuals' mental and physical health, as well as a film that follows three families and their caregiving experience. I'm really excited to be joined today by MSNBC news anchor and longtime Alzheimer's Association champion, Richard Lui. Richard was the long-distance caregiver for his father who was living with Alzheimer's disease, and his personal caregiving experience inspired his second film, Unconditional, an inspirational documentary that explores the impact on a person's physical and mental health in their caregiving experience. Richard, it's so nice to have you join us today. Thank you so much for being here.
Monica, thanks for having me, and I'm looking forward to hanging out.
Can you tell me what about your caregiving experience really inspired you to make this film?
You know, it was what I didn't know, what I was going through. And I realized the film took us 7 years from beginning to today. And we spent 2 years editing. We had a lot of heart-to-heart talks between the producers and the editors. And when you sit down and you're talking about the video and you're looking at yourself and others, and in this case, you know, although I'm not a sort of person that terribly loves the camera being turned on me, but I realize that part of our journey is finding others and allowing ourselves to really see others along the way. And that we either consciously or subconsciously derive a lot of comfort, a lot of strength from others that are walking along with us. And that walk is sometimes, you're on a path, as you know so well, Monica, and others that are gathering us today. But at a certain point, late in the game, as I was having one of those deep conversations, like we are now with the editor, and she would ask me, well, why do you want that scene cut that way? And for instance, in the film, we have one family, a caregiver, the spouse of one who's living through great journeys in caregiving. And she wanted to know, but didn't want to know exactly what he was going through. And I think that's part of our journey in the Alzheimer's walk. When we're caring for somebody with Alzheimer's, like I with my father, is I absolutely wanted to know what he was going through. But at a certain point, did I really want to be there to know everything, all the pains and all the difficulties, and maybe his own mental health struggle? And so to answer your question, it took me 7 years. It took me 7 years to understand what I didn't know. And it took me 7 years to then therefore say I needed to really dig into what was going on in our mind, in our hearts, that sometimes we didn't see, that I didn't see. And I still believe that I have a lot more to learn going forward, though my father passed a year ago.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a journey in which caregivers are continually learning because the disease impacts each person differently, and you really never know what's going to be happening from day to day. So I appreciate that. Can you, for those who are not really familiar with your family story in Alzheimer's disease, I know in the film you talk about one of the first warning signs that the family noticed with your father was his difficulty in remembering the names of his siblings, and he comes from a really large family. Were there other warning signs that you or your family noticed that made you pause and think that something more serious might be going on?
I think along the way, the symptoms that he showed was not only that, by the way, him forgetting any one of his siblings' names is a big deal because they grew up in a small little 400 square foot shack in San Francisco, Chinatown, all 15 of them. They were, you know, locked at the hip together. They loved each other. When they got together, it was like high school, elementary school, all over again. They could have been their 60s, 70s, and 80s. They were just laughing and chuckling. So forgetting his sister's name was a big deal. And, you know, outside of that, he was never necessarily a person of mastery of facts or figures, or that could recall things that had happened recently. But that was the major thing. And in addition to that, as we were with him more often, is again the repeat activities. So whether it was eating every 3 hours or wanting to take a shower every 2 hours, those sorts of things really started to become obvious and dominant in what we were going through. And again, he lived with Alzheimer's for 8 years. And so he did pretty okay living with it. And throughout that, he remained very positive, which I think I was watching and learning from him as to why the movie Unconditional is really trying to show that we can live the laugh as well as live the difficult at the same time, because he showed me that in his journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And, your story as far as, your father forgetting his sister's name, it's something that I hear over and over again from families. What was the moment that made you think something was wrong? This was not a normal part of aging. And so common for me to hear that families say, or the person living with the disease says, I was having difficulty doing something that I had done my whole life that just came so natural to me. And that was the trigger that said, hey, something more serious is going on. We need to go see the doctor.
And also, Monica, it's the moment we decide to do something, right? There's a moment that we notice something, but there's a moment we decide to do something. And that was the moment I may have seen other things along the way. He had said, it's possible I'm going to go and see the neurologist. But the moment we decide to do something, I think is also very essential in our journey.
Yeah, taking action and getting early detection and diagnosis is so critically important.
Not easy.
Yeah, not at all. With caregivers, we know that about 40% of them have told us that they suffer from depression. 3 in 4 report that they are somewhat to very concerned about maintaining their own health since becoming a caregiver. And I know for you as a long distance caregiver, your schedule, right? You'd work from Friday through Sunday. On Monday mornings, you'd fly cross country to California from New York. You'd provide care to your father all week. And when Friday came, you'd fly back to New York to perform your job. And so can you talk about the toll and the mental and physical impact of caregiving that you experienced as a long distance caregiver for your father?
I tried to stay with my exercise regimen, which was, working out 2 or 3 times a week. And also I was very careful about what I ate during that period of time. And I have to admit, the first 5 years, in terms of the physical health, I think I was okay, even though I was flying so much. But I think year 6 was when I had more of an emotional question. I was standing in the subway in New York because I get off work at about midnight on Sunday. And then I'd go home and nap, and then I'd get up at 3, and then I'd head down to the subway to get out to JFK to fly back home. And it's if you've been in the New York subways, Monica, at 3 a.m. on a Monday morning, you, for a moment, because you don't often feel this in New York, for a moment you feel like you're standing alone. And it's cold, it's quiet. And I remember that moment where I said, what am I doing? I've done this for so many years, got up so early and took the first flight out. But we do that. We question, what are we doing? Are we okay? And I did stop and think about it. And I just kept on going. Yeah. But I think year 6 and 7 are the ones where I started to feel, okay, this is taking some real energy from me. And then in terms of mental health, I really started to look into it in the last 2 years, thinking back, it's okay not to talk about, May being Mental Health Awareness Month, is that we are okay to say we're not okay. And even if that's okay, even if that's all we can say, that's a step to even think about it. And I think in the last year or 2, I started to evaluate that. And I also was very accepting of myself not being either a person walking down the street screaming at the sky versus a person that was supposedly completely mentally health good. Instead, I allowed myself to be in between, and that I could struggle, and it was okay to struggle because pushing it away was not good.
Yeah, Alzheimer's disease is such an isolating disease, right? Just because of the stigma that's tied to it. And for caregivers, to your point, sometimes we're such in the thick of providing care and handling all of those responsibilities. We may not even know that we're experiencing caregiver stress. Was there anything that you noticed other than on the subway that you started to experience to say, you know what, this isn't really normal for me? And recognizing what those triggers were that said, maybe you are experiencing caregiver stress and you need to do something about it.
Oh, for sure. I was experiencing caregiver stress, just like my father was going through his own mental health ups and downs. And I'm very clear to say, though, here, Monica, I mean, mental health equals health, as a lot of people say, just like physical health has a positive connotation. We should definitely embrace it. Mental health can be a positive connotation. And I do see it on both sides of that ledger. And I would say that in addition to standing in the middle of the subway, it's, you get faster to anger, you get faster to sadness. You are more tired. These are all things that are but everybody experiences it differently. Mm-hmm. And so, when I was digging into unmitigated selflessness, which caregivers in all sorts and flavors do, that we have to check ourselves that we are not giving too much. And my mom, I saw, had done that. And while she did not recognize it, I did, because when she was the primary caregiver, when I wasn't there or any of my siblings weren't there, I call it the scream, because on the cloud camera, we would put in cloud cameras in the apartment so that my mom would have to re-traumatize herself by describing when my father would fall or he would do something. Instead, we would just tell us what time it happened. We look at the cloud camera. And I heard her scream at my dad one time. And it wasn't that she was screaming only because she was upset with him and that he was, whatever, maybe he was running into the shower again, completely naked. And, we turned off the water so he couldn't do that. But I heard the scream that she was not only mad, but that she was sad and that she was screaming for help. And your parents, your siblings and I heard the scream. And that's when I told my siblings, when I talked to my mom, we have to figure out what's next. Yeah. What is better for her? We all have the scream that others can hear. And we need to listen as fellow caregivers, as well as caregivers, to try to listen to what we're saying and what we're doing, because we don't want to get to the scream, but we need to be able to listen to it.
Yeah, and it's so difficult for some caregivers to ask for help. Sometimes I know in talking with caregivers, they may think that it's a sign of weakness or that they're not a good caregiver because they're asking for that support. But it really is critically important, as you know, and no one can really go through this disease all alone without that support system in place.
I mean, and to that point, as I adjusted my plan, Monica, over the years, and especially now that I fly back to see my mother once a month, who was just diagnosed with dementia about 2 months ago, which we did notice we had certain symptoms that we're watching. But, I'm more accepting that I only can be back a day, or that I won't do the 6 a.m. flight and push myself and get a nap. And in the beginning, it's, we all do that. You just said that. We're critical of ourselves, but unmitigated selflessness. And that's a lot of talk, and you know better than I about self-help and how to regulate that. There's lots of ways of getting through that.
Right. It's okay to take care of yourself and put yourself first. That makes you be a better caregiver, certainly, if we're able to do that. Richard, I know that today there are more than 11 million caregivers, unpaid caregivers that are caring for somebody living with dementia. And so many of them think that they have to go through this disease alone, or they don't know what resources are available to them in their community. In the film, you said something that really struck me. You said, it was a lonely road until I found others. What did you mean by that? And what resources did you find helpful to you and your family in your caregiving experience?
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that was very purposeful, Monica. And, I said at the beginning of our conversation, to truly seek out others at all different levels. And I learned so much from talking to people like you, the Alzheimer's Association, really activating my brain and my heart and my strength for this space, which so many do. And so number one, talking to people like I did for years, for Sky Blossom, now Unconditional, talking about the topic every day when we're in edit, right, with the producer. And this has been so therapeutic. I had to look through, okay, wait, why do I want this to be edited this way? And there was a reason why. It was like sitting in a therapy session, because I was digging into. So find where you can dig into it. Is a therapist, psychiatrist, psychologist? Is it a friend? Is it a support group? In terms of understanding how to really get strong when it comes to mental health, to be ready for all these challenges. And when it comes to facts and figures and guidance, we several times, and I did this with my family, of course, would go to the Alzheimer's Association and, sundowners. I remember that very early in the process. Oh, here's this great article. And I send it out to my siblings. This is typically what happens. This is what we should look for. Prepare guides, prepare to care guides. Those are very important. Get in there early. I know those are difficult. And true to my what I love to do, which is storytelling and narrative and arts, is start to bring in not just the oatmeal, if you will, of the experience, which is very important. Bring in some of the brown sugar. And that might be a movie. Like, that's why I dug into 2 documentaries. But there's a lot of narrative films that talk about this very experience. Start to embrace all, because it's not just one part of us, it's all of us. And we sometimes put it in a corner. Go to a concert that's about Alzheimer's, that they're singing about. Jay Allen, who's one of the champions, right, at the Alzheimer's Association. That's a great thing to engage in, right? He's a singer and he sings about it. And I think when we can start to access those other parts of our brain, left and right, we start to do better. And those are all, together, sort of the mix that I think has worked out well for me.
Yeah, I think it's a really important message because, we always say the first thing that caregivers should do is get educated. And I think what you're talking about is there's so many ways to educate yourself, right? And really finding the method that works best for you. And I always tell caregivers, take your time. You don't have to learn everything all at once. This is a journey, right? It's a marathon, not a sprint. And so there's resources, as you said, that are available, really figuring out what works best for you to get that information as you need it and as you're open to receiving it.
Yeah, so education is super important because it helps us develop a structure, and but living it is also a different part of the equation, and really embracing the living of it, not only, and again, as I was saying earlier, the tough part, but living it on the new stuff, how I was able to laugh with my dad in different ways, how I was closer with him and closer with my mother and closer with my siblings. Cherish that. Don't, as NBC's America's Got Talent, Nightbird said, when she came on the show when she was about 30 years old and was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and she was asked, "Why are you here?" She said, "I have a song to share. And it's because I want to remind people not to wait for the bad stuff to go away, to live the good stuff." And I said, wow, how simply said about what we go through as caregivers. Sometimes we believe if I allow myself to live the good stuff, then I'm forgetting the bad stuff, that it has to be one or the other. And the reality is we can live both of them, not polar, one or the other, just like mental health.
Yeah, that's great. So, one of the most difficult decisions that I've heard that families have to make is the decision to place the person living with dementia in a long-term care community. As a Hispanic American, I know personally how my culture responds to making a decision to place a family member in a nursing home, as an example. However, we're dealing with a disease that, as you know, the individual can live 48 years, but up to 20 after diagnosis. It's progressive. It's terminal. There is no cure. And there are challenges that caregivers can experience around safety issues, the well-being of the person with dementia, their own well-being. And sometimes families that's the only decision that they have to make, is to place someone in a long-term care community. So as an Asian American, can you share, how did your family come to the decision to place your father in a long-term care community? And what tips do you have for other families who are really struggling to make this decision for the person that they're caring for?
First off, we're not alone by our culture, and that we actually share a lot of the similarities, whether it is in the Latino Hispanic American community, the API community, the Black community, the Indigenous community, the white communities. We all want to take care of our loved ones. And I think that doesn't mean that there are cultural differences. The great thing is that there are resources out there that are in language, for instance, and in culture. We don't have enough of them, but they are the beginnings of, not that we are different, but just that the way we communicate and the way we hear things and the way we live it is obviously different. And that's okay, because that's America. That's one of the great things, is we have all this rich fabric. And so I think the opportunity in front of us is to think about showing that sameness of wanting to care for a loved one, but do it in language, is what I say, because in the API community, there are 100 languages, unlike other communities, and that's very important. I also think that feeling that, because I am API or you are Latina, Hispanic, does that mean that it's totally different the way you care for your parents or your spouses or partners and loved ones and children? Yes, but I think what's the major objective as we try to dial in is just to feel like we're heard as an individual. And there are many ways of being heard and seen as an individual that we don't have all the tools for. And culture is one of them. The cultural opportunities in front of us to dig into that has yet to be really tapped into. It's important that we look at education. I totally agree with that. But we have an opportunity to really look at the other affectations of what we all are in this great country, who are living with loved ones who are living with Alzheimer's.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, one of the things that the Alzheimer's Association is doing is really reaching out and forming relationships with these diverse communities to better understand, how do they like to get health information? What really works for them, so that we can kind of modify the way that we're sharing information to these communities so it is impactful and it is helpful to them, because the way that we deliver information to one community may not resonate to other communities. And so we really need to be able to understand that and be able to meet those needs.
Very true. Very, very true.
Yeah. Richard, what do you hope people take away from the film and our conversation today?
The hope for the film is that we would see that there is more than one way to live through the journey, and that the roles that we go through as we're caring for somebody else is so human, that the mental health element of caring for somebody else can be educational and muscle building. And I say I came out better in the end. I think my father would be very glad that we all, I think, came out better in the end. I don't want him to have gone through this for us to be stronger and better together. But I'm talking about things, Monica, I would never talk about publicly. I mean, my emotions, mental health, how I care for my family. So the hope for the film Unconditional is that you would see the joy despite difficulty, that you would live the good even though the bad is happening, and charge through it and embrace it and laugh along the way, because it will open the doors, as we've been talking about. That was the hope. And that is why it took us 2 years to edit, because we really wanted to get it right. And it's a binding experience, as you know so well, and we wanted to show that.
Yeah, I loved what you said in the film, because I wrote it down. You said you shared as a family in the pain, in the experience, and you're all the better for it.
Yeah.
So that was really touching. Where can the audience actually view the film Unconditional?
You can go to unconditionalmovie.com. Also throughout May, there are theaters across the country. It will be seen on PBS.org as well through Passport. It'll be shown on PBS throughout the country starting in May. We will be seen in all but 5% of the country, so it's been very widely accepted, which is great.
Great. Yeah.
And then it will be streamed on other streaming platforms that you're very familiar with, like Amazon Prime, as well as Apple TV and others going forward. So May is the beginning of this, the release of the movie through AMC theaters. And thanks to Universal Pictures Distribution and Deluxe leaning in, you can go to a theater, you can see it next to all the blockbusters, and there will be Unconditional as well. And a portion of the ticket sales will be going to the Alzheimer's Association and other 501c3s in this space. So this is a not-for-profit project from the beginning. It will be there throughout its release, and we'll be pushing it out all throughout the year. We'll have more programming in November to share with you as well around Unconditional.
Excellent.
And we also have Jay Allen singing the original song for the movie. And yes, and so he'll be on Pandora, iTunes. You can hear the soundtrack as well, because Maria Leneva, who's a composer, will be on iTunes and be on Pandora and Spotify. We'll be doing some live music events with Jay around the movie too. So a lot of things.
That's great. I do want to say, I thought the film was so beautifully done, and it's not only tells the story of three families and their caregiving experience, but for me, I thought it was also a story of courage, perseverance, and above all, love. So thank you so much for making the effort to create this beautiful film for everyone to see. We really appreciate that. Richard, thank you so much for joining us today. I know that you agree with me when I say that no one has to go through this disease alone. And so I want to make sure that everyone who's watching knows that the Alzheimer's Association offers our caregiver forum at alzconnected.org, where caregivers can get connected and meet with other people and talk to them and share their tips and strategies. We also are available through our 24/7 helpline at 1-800-272-3900, or visit us on our website at alz.org/care. Richard, thank you again for having this really important discussion and for sharing your story and your time with us today. And to everyone else, thanks for joining us as well.
Thank you, Monica. And thank you, Alzheimer's Association, everybody else too.
Take care.